So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on this.
Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. Welcome back for the second episode of Noah's Zookeeper, featuring Karina Altman. Answers in Genesis, Zookeeper, who doesn't keep animals in their ark, ironically enough. When we last left off, Karina was badly misinterpreting a chart illustrating universal common descent.
They also believe that all life has a common ancestor, which is where you get this tree from. It doesn't matter if it's a dinosaur, an elephant, or a mushroom, or a tree, or a person. We all share the exact same ancestor.
Yep, that is all that chart is attempting to convey. You finally got there.
But again, we don't know what that ancestor is. It's a mystery. We just have to believe that there was one.
I mean, identifying a particular organism as the last universal common ancestor for all life would be a pretty daunting task. But we can know some things about it. For example, it was probably a single-celled organism without a nucleus that formed proteins based on a DNA molecule that formed a ring floating freely in the cell. It would probably have resembled modern bacteria, but been significantly more simple than any living bacterium.
Next, they believe that changes within animals are undirected. It's random, it's a natural phenomena that's just random by chance, and it requires a lot of time to form all these different species because of that.
Well, mutations are undirected, but the result of populations reproducing with mutations are directed by selection pressure. So no, it's not chance and random. Part of it is, but the end result cannot simply be said to be random. For example, if you can identify a specific pressure that will remain constant in an environment for a while, you can predict the sort of thing that will evolve. One easy example is camouflage. If a population of organisms is being preyed on, and they would be harder to catch if they resemble the environment more to their predators, then we can predict that out of the random mutations that can change their appearance, those that make them less distinct from their surroundings will be favored, and the population will evolve to be inconspicuous to predators.
They also believe that animals evolve into different animals.
Animals speciate and will always remain members of the clades to which their ancestors belonged. So unless you're going to be way more specific, I can't really say if you're being accurate. Although the argument could be made that you're being so vague that you're being inaccurate for that reason alone.
So, like one animal into a totally different animal, like dinosaurs totally turning into birds.
Except birds are totally dinosaurs. They're not totally different animals. Birds are a subset of dinosaurs the same way that canines are a subset of mammals. Birds didn't cease to be dinosaurs, not even a little.
And lastly, they believe that modifications result in entirely new structures and animals.
Kind of, but when you really dig into it, even things that seem like entirely new structures always derive from modifications of what came before in ancestors. And if you were there to watch the whole process in real time, assuming you could live that long, at no point would a new organ simply appear. Instead, already existing body structures would slowly acquire new functions, then lose old ones, all while modifying their shape and size. It's only looking back that we can say something new has arisen. In reality, though, it is always the same structures existing in a continuum.
Now, there are several problems with this tree. First of all, there are no eyewitness accounts of any of this.
So your first problem with this tree is something that isn't a problem? In what world does no eyewitness make something not true, or even less likely to be true? There were no eyewitnesses to Neptune before it was suggested it should be there based on irregularities in the orbit of Uranus all the way back to 1846. Does that mean we shouldn't have believed in it? There are no eyewitnesses to many criminal cases that are nevertheless solved. Should we toss out all forensic science? In fact, chances are that no one was around to see your embryological development. Does that mean we should assume it did not happen? Obviously, the answer is no. A lack of eyewitness testimony does nothing to tell us whether something is true or not.
Everything is guesswork, and the origin theories change all the time. Like I said, I've heard multiple different ones just in my studies, so they never can agree on what actually happened.
What you mean is that scientists update their ideas based on new data, and in fact, they can agree on quite a lot. Most of the tree of life is pretty well established, although there is always something to learn. But chances are, you're not going to find anytime soon that evolutionary biologists have discovered that frogs are more closely related to raccoons than raccoons are to tigers, or that fungi are more closely related to plants than animals. You're looking at a 1,000-piece puzzle, with 2/3 of the pieces in place, another sixth still to be fit in, and the last sixth missing. All the pieces seem to make a picture of a train, but you're insisting that not only is the puzzle not really a train, but you don't even think it's a single puzzle. You'd prefer we take seriously the idea that it's really 110-piece puzzles all picturing completely different things.
Also, this theory violates several major scientific laws. Firstly, it violates the law of biogenesis, which says life cannot arise from non-life.
There isn't really a law of biogenesis. In fact, searching for it primarily returns results from creationist pseudoscience. What is really meant by biogenesis in this context is that there is no vital force which can turn dead matter into living organisms. So mice do not spawn out of dirty clothing, maggots do not spawn out of rotting meat. Instead, cellular life is created from previous cellular life via biological reproduction. Nothing about this precludes abiogenesis. Also, laws of physics can be broken, and all that means is that it was never a valid law in the first place. Early, you warned against using the wisdom of man, which you seem to identify with modern science. But these laws you complain about evolution violating are just that, the wisdom of man. Because all laws of nature are descriptions of humans based on how the universe works. So on the basis of your own train of thought, that these laws may be violated is not a particular problem for an idea. Of course, evolution doesn't really break any laws of nature anyway, so it's a moot point.
It violates the law of cause and effect, which says nothing occurs by chance.
There is no such law. In fact, quantum mechanics is inherently chance-based, and attempts to uncover hidden variables to recover a non-stochastic mechanism have met with not only no success, but in fact indications that there may be, in fact, no such hidden variables. One significant example of this occurs in light polarization, which behaves in such a way that polarized filters, of the type you might use to watch a 3D movie at the theater, can act in ways that would be impossible if there were a single true polarization state for light. So not only is there no law of nature stating that nothing is random, in fact reality is, at its most fundamental level, inherently random as far as anyone can tell.
It violates the first law of thermodynamics, which says energy cannot be created or destroyed.
That's not what the first law of thermodynamics says. Instead, it says that the total energy, including energy in the form of matter, in an isolated system must remain constant. But evolution doesn't involve any violation of that law, even under your incorrect simplification of it. Do you think evolution posits that organisms come out of thin air? Because I think you'll find that that idea is far more in line with divine creation than the theory of evolution.
And it also violates the second law of thermodynamics, which says things tend toward disorder, randomness, and chaos.
Again, that's not the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics says that the total amount of energy that can be used to do work in an isolated system must always stay the same or decrease. Put another way, it says that the total number of quantum microstates that can express the macro state of an isolated system must always increase or stay the same. In neither case does evolution suggest any decrease in global entropy for an isolated system. Also, when a creationist says this to you, ask him for the kind of units you might use for entropy. Here's a hint, he needs to use units of energy per unit of mass, typically joules per kilogram, although technically any unit of energy per unit mass can work.
For example, if you were to take your car today and park it out in the woods and leave it for 10 years, when you come back, is that car going to look better or is it going to look worse?
My subjective assessment of the aesthetics of an abandoned car has nothing to do with the total amount of energy in an isolated system available to do work. In fact, even its ability to operate as a vehicle has nothing to do with it.
It's going to look worse, right? It's going to be all rusted out and damaged. Things tend toward disorder and chaos. They do not get better.
Do they? Maybe many things do from your perspective, but an anthropocentric view of order and chaos have nothing to do with thermodynamics.
And lastly, there are no observable mechanisms for an animal or structure to change into a different animal or structure. This has never been seen or recorded.
Well, it's been seen and recorded that animals and their anatomy can change over time through evolution, so unless you're going to be way more specific about what you mean by a different animal or structure, this statement is essentially meaningless.
All right, so what do creationists believe? What does the Bible say? Now, we believe that God created everything, right? Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." We believe he created the universe in 6 24-hour days, just like Genesis 1 describes.
Then you're going to run into serious problems from astronomy, geology, biology, paleontology, biogeography, astrophysics, etc. But hey, if you want to be wrong about religion, I can't stop you.
So instead of a tree, we believe in something called the orchard, and it looks more like this.
A series of trees arbitrarily cut off at some undefined point for no particular reason other than because it makes you feel not too much like evolution must be true, but enough like it's true that you can pretend it helps your absurd arc story? Got it.
So we believe that life came from life. God created everything, right? We also believe that the original animal kinds were created 6,000 years ago.
Really, believing the world was created 6,000 years ago is about the same level of error as estimating the drive from Miami, Florida to Seattle, Washington at about 23 feet or 7 meters, when in fact it is nearly 3,300 miles or about 5,300 kilometers. It's staggering how wrong that is. The approximate age of the Earth is not in dispute within about 3 orders of magnitude among anyone who is willing to look at the data honestly. But no, you just want to pretend the Earth is 750,000 times younger than it is, and I'm being generous to you by using the age of the Earth and not the universe.
Now, we'll get back to that word kinds in a moment, and we get the 6,000 years from the biblical genealogies, adding up that time period.
You keep saying you'll get back to that word, but really you've used it so many times now that it should really have already been defined. Otherwise, no one really knows what you're saying.
We also believe that changes within animal kinds are directed, that they are design features that God placed in the genetics of these animals at creation.
So no new variation came about after that, eh? I assume that means we should never see more variation in anything you call a kind than could be fit into the number of animals representing that kind that you think got on the ark. So we'll see if you can identify any supposed kinds and look at that prediction. If it's wrong, I feel safe in calling your model nonsense.
We also believe that no new animal kinds have ever evolved. We'll get back to that word again in a moment. And we also believe that modifications occur in structures that already exist.
Well, that's exactly what evolution describes. So I don't know that that's something you can use to contrast your ideas with the standard model in science.
So instead of having all life, whether it's a tree, a mushroom, or a person, coming from one ancestor, we believe that there were multiple ancestors within their kinds created during creation week, and that's where those animals come from, which is why we have an orchard versus a tree.
I do want to quickly point out that the idea of a single common ancestor for all life has not always been uncontroversial in biology, even after the widespread acceptance of evolutionary theory. It is possible that upon examination we could find evidence for multiple sources for life that had persisted to today. For example, we could have found a class of organisms that used a different set of amino acids, since modern life as a rule only uses 20 of the 22 amino acids. The two excluded are selenocysteine and pyrrolysine. Or one with a very different way of storing amino acid sequence in its genetic material, perhaps as groups of 4 nucleotides instead of 3. Or with a radically different assignment to the meaning of the various groups of 3 nucleotides in DNA. Nothing about that seems impossible from a chemical standpoint, and the fact is that no such life has been discovered, and the presence of highly conserved genes in various organisms indicates that yes, life almost certainly had a single common ancestor population.
We have the cat tree, we have the dog tree, we have the primate tree, and the human tree, versus everything coming from one thing.
Why aren't humans in the primate tree? They have all the morphological traits that have resulted in every other member of the primate tree being included in it, such as fully enclosed orbits, large brains, extremely flexible shoulder joints, nails rather than claws, opposable thumbs, trichromacy, etc. But then why are cats and dogs on different trees? Why not have a carnivora tree? They all have the typical claws, digits, skulls, and teeth of members of that order. Why are they not a tree? But then why are not all of the things you mentioned part of the mammal tree? They all have jaws made of only the dentary bone. They all can produce milk from mammary glands to feed their young. They all develop ear bones from pharyngeal arches that in other animals go on to produce jaw bones posterior to the dentary. They all lack true temporal fenestrae, but they all have zygomatic arches made of the bones expected for such a structure, and which still serve to allow passage of jaw muscles from the skull to the posterior lateral part of the jawbone. They all have heterodont dentition with the same types of teeth, namely incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. Why isn't mammal a tree?
Now, there are several confirmations of the orchard. Genesis 1 is the eyewitness account of creation. God was there. He had Moses write it down for us.
Good luck proving that God really told anyone to write it down, or that that person was Moses. But even if he did, if it conflicts with reality, which it does, then your interpretation is stupid and should be thrown in the trash.
Biblical genealogies do show the age of the earth to be about 6,000 years.
No, biblical genealogies can be interpreted as indicating that the biblical authors thought that the Earth was about 6,000 years old. That's all they can do on their own. They don't even tell us definitively that the people who wrote them took them seriously as literal facts.
And we observe animals changing within their kinds today.
Well, you haven't bothered to define a kind except to say that they all come from the same tree, and since evolution precludes anything from doing otherwise, that's not exactly a slam dunk for anti-evolution.
New species and animal breeds are constantly being formed, but this is not evolution, and we'll get more into that as I keep talking.
That most certainly is evolution. It's not evolution on a grand scale, but it's like looking at a rivulet in the dirt caused by your garden hose and saying it's not erosion because it's not much like the Grand Canyon.
All right, so let's go back to that word kinds. What exactly is a kind? Well, let's look at what the Bible says. So right here in Genesis, we get it mentioned a lot. Genesis 1:24 through 25 says, "And God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good." That was a lot of times that God said the word kinds. So actually, God mentions or uses the phrase according to its or their kinds 10 times during days 3, 5, and 6 of creation. So days 3 was plants, day 5 was air and sea animals, and day 6 was land animals and people. So when God repeats things, he wants it emphasized, right? And he says it 10 times in this one chapter.
Right, but it's not defined, so I don't care how emphasized it is, it doesn't tell us what a kind is, not in any scientifically useful way.
Next, we'll look at what he says when we're dealing with the ark. Genesis 6:19 through 20. God tells Noah, "You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive."
Again, that doesn't include a definition. Does she not know what a definition is? Would she recognize one if she read one?
Next, Genesis 7:2 through 3. God says, "Take with you 7 of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 2 of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth." God mentions kinds 7 times in his instructions to Noah. So again, this is a very important term.
I'm perfectly willing to grant its importance to the narrative of Genesis, but that doesn't really help us know what a kind is. Well, I think that's all I can take of one person failing to define a kind while pretending that she's defining a kind. I think we'll leave her further attempts to use the Bible to define a kind for next time. If you like this content, check out the description below where I have a merch store, so you can show people just how much you like it. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur.
Thanks for watching, but before you go, I'd like to take a minute to thank my patrons, especially my $20 patrons: Bent Hovind, Ian Chen, Bob Knob, The Evil Scotsman, Henry Hutanen, Chris Love, and Res Instance. My team over at Patreon are helping me make these videos, and I have tiers starting as low as $1 and going all the way up to $100. So if you'd like to help out the Dapper Dino channel and help make these videos better and possibly even more frequent, then why don't you head over there and check it out. If a recurring donation isn't right for you, but you'd still like to help out, I have a link to my Amazon wishlist in the description. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur.
So you found the skeleton. How would you tell people that this is you personally? How would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on this.